Chapter 502, The Inner World of the Scroll. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. With the breakthrough of the realm, Zhang Yuoquan's body trembled violently. All his pores opened, exploding a tremendous power to absorb the spiritual qi between heaven and earth. His body was completely wrapped in a vortex of spiritual qi. It did not disappear until a few days later. Zhang Yuoquan laughed, and shouted, "I've captured it. I've captured it. I finally captured the mark of time." The sword of time, swift and neat. His eyes remained closed, as if he was still asleep. He acted out a sword skill with his arms. As he struck the sword out sharply, it turned into a streak of light and sliced. Swoosh! The sword radiance cut through the space domain and ripped a hole. Blood water poured in swiftly, completely submerging him. As he opened his eyes, he threw his hands to the left and right, to support the space domain. He looked at his hand, and then, the yin-yang wooden graph on the ground. He said to himself, "Amazing. The sword of time can actually break open the space domain. But, how was I able to practice it successfully?" Zhang Yuoquan rubbed his temple and tried his best to remember. He remembered that when he pressed his palms over the yin-yang wooden graph, he seemed to have seen a huge ancient tree and an old man practicing sword technique. He felt like he had practiced sword technique with the elder for several months. At the same time, it had only been an instant. "It's the same sensation I had the last time." It seemed like a long time, but it also felt like only a moment. But, this time, it's much clearer than the last time. "I'm sure that I'm learning sword techniques with an elder." The first move is called the swift and neat. Zhang Yuoquan tried hard to remember, but he couldn't recall anything. There were only vague images in his mind. Did I go into the inner world of the yin-yang wooden graph? Since the yin-yang wooden graph absorbed the wood spirit primitive world's qi of origin, the sacred prime tree should have developed enough to hold up the inner world of the graph. At the thought of this, he immediately injected the graph with qi. With a swoosh, golden light arose from its surface. The rays of sunlight were as delicate as threads of silk. They gathered together and turned into a space door. Zhang Yuoquan stepped out and into the door as if walking through a curtain of light. He stepped into a lush emerald grassland. The whole world was luxuriantly green. He could vaguely see huge towering mountains with deep ridges and vast forests surrounded by clouds and mist in the distance. It was a surreal landscape. A moment ago, he'd been in a dimly lit blood pool. And now he was in an independent world, a paradise, isolated from the real world. This is the scroll world of the yin-yang wooden graph. What is the difference between this world and the real world? It's amazing. I wonder which realm Saint Monk Zumi reached to be able to create a world by himself. Zhang Yuoquan was surprised. He immediately thought of the Buddhism idea of one flower, one world, and one body. He took a deep breath. The air he breathed was saturated with the delicate fragrance of earth, flowers, and plants. A powerful spiritual qi surged into his body and ran through his meridians. The intensity of spiritual qi here is almost the same as in the wildlands of Oman Ridge. However, it is far from comparable to that in the East Region Saint City. The intensity of spiritual qi determined the quality of a practicing environment. But, it was not absolute. If he had enough spiritual crystals, he could lay out a spirit gathering array. As a result, even in a spiritual qi picture scroll world with relatively poor spiritual qi, it did not affect the practice. Most importantly, when 10 days passed in the scroll world, only 1 day passed in the external world. It was most helpful to his practice. He looked at the horizon and quickly saw the sacred prime tree. He displayed a body movement and flew from the ground. Before long, he came to the top of a hill close to the tree. In the distance stood a withered tree stump, approximately 100 meters tall. It looked like a huge flat round table. It stretched beyond what the human eye could see. Dense and innumerable growth rings were imprinted on the stump. He could not tell how many thousands of rings there were. Each ring was like a page that recorded an ancient story. An ancient flowing power came from the stump, which was like an ancient tree, recording endless secrets. Zhang Yuoquan was extremely shocked. Is this the sacred prime tree in the legend? There was a well-known legend in the Kunlun's field about the sacred prime tree. It was said that it was a divine tree that connected heaven and earth, also known as the Rod of Kunlun. In the medieval ancient times, over 100,000 years ago, it had been chopped down. From that time on, no one in Kunlun's field could become a god. As a result, historians determined that the broken sacred prime tree marked the end of the medieval ancient times. According to Blackie, Saint Monk Zumi had transplanted its roots into the inner world of the yin-yang wooden graph. It was highly likely that it was this huge stump in front of Zhang Yuochen. He spread out his arms and went with the flow. He came to the top of the stump and fluttered down lightly. It really is the stump of the sacred prime tree. It still exudes such strong spiritual chi, even after such a long time. It seems to have a more advanced airflow, probably the legendary holy chi. Zhang was surprised. In the inner world of the scroll, the closer you got to the stump, the stronger the spiritual chi was. And if you stood on the stump, the spiritual chi was as rich as that of the Saint Mountain of Saint Academy, even more. This stump beneath his feet was like a huge flat martial arts field, extending to infinity. He walked for a long time before he came to the center. In the very center of the stump, a new seedling was growing. This new seedling had been growing for many years and had become very strong, with a trunk diameter of over 100 meters. It was like a high steep mountain soaring directly into the clouds. He could feel the new seedling's huge vitality clearly. This is the place I went in my dream. It's here. This is the new seedling of the sacred prime tree. It is already propping up the world inside the scroll. He looked for the elder under the tree but could not find him. Blackie has been sealed in the scroll world forever, so he is certainly very familiar with this world. I can't find the reason, so I have to leave and consult with him. Then I will have a better understanding. He looked up with awe in his eyes. He clasped his hands together, bowed to the new seedling, and turned away. He didn't know how long he had been practicing. He was afraid to miss the 10-day appointment, so he hurriedly withdrew from the scroll world. Swoosh! He went through the space door and returned to the bottom of the blood pool once more. The yin-yang wooden graph flashed into a speck of light. It flew between his eyebrows and suspended in his chi pool. He took a deep breath and gradually calmed himself. He discovered he had already reached the completion of the heaven realm and his spiritual power had increased to level 42. He had expected his spiritual power to reach level 42. After all, if there had been no breakthrough in spiritual power, he would not have been able to learn Swift and Neat, the first movement of Sword of Time. But, how had he broken through to the completion of the heaven realm? After all, he had just broken through to the final state of the heaven realm. He had estimated he would need to practice for at least another half a year before he could break through to the completion. When he perceived the Sword of Time, had his martial soul turned into a false god body and absorbed the sacrifice power in the blood pool? This was the only possibility he could think of. He released spiritual power and merged it into the blood pool. As a result, he found that the sacrifice power in the blood pool faded gradually. It seemed that he had been in the blood pool for a long time. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to break through to the completion of heaven realm. He looked serious and said to himself, I hope it hasn't been more than 10 days. He transported genuine chi to his legs and stepped on the bottom of the blood pool. With the help of the recoil power, he shot up like an arrow.